Szóval nézzük meg, ugye Legendary Dropnak is megvan ugye a véleménye, és hát ugye ez, igen, így van egy pár ember, akivel ugye egyet lehet érteni azzal kapcsolatban, hogy mit jelent az, hogy cserben hagyják a franchise-t, és a franchise-t támogató fanokat a stúdiók.
I've been getting called everything under the sun lately. I think I'm probably just going to take a break from Twitter because, well, my opinions come out far better in a YouTube video anyway. How many times have you guys looked at a game and said, who is this being made
Így
for?
van.
How many times have you guys thought that exact same thing about
Ez
a
kinek
long-running
készült?
franchise or a series that you've supported for years?
Érted?
One of the most wildest trends that I've seen in the games industry is
Ki
the
a
emergence of these games that seem to have just no target audience whatsoever. Whether it's the themes, whether it's the genre, whether it's the characters, doesn't really matter. You can just instantly look at it and know nobody is going to show up for this. Hell, they're probably not even going to hear about it. Along with that, we have long-running franchises that have been pivoting so hard. These guys have been snapping their own ankles. They have been changing their games, changing their audiences, changing just about everything they can, trying to broaden their...
Definiált franchise-okról beszélünk, amik már évek óta mennek. Több 10-20 éve. És egyik pillanatról a másikra úgy gondolják, hogy ez itt oké. Szóval, hogy így, hogy tényleg nem gondolják úgy, hogy ennyire nem számít, hogy saját franchise-t alkossanak annak, amit egyébként reprezentálni akarnak. Passz meg.
audience as much as possible while just losing all those people just the same. Recently, we just saw PlayStation announce God of War Law-Fae, a spin-off title starting Faye instead of Kratos, and people are mad. I haven't seen gamers going at each other's throats like this in a long time. It's like Bloodsport. I've actually been kind of enjoying it, but much of it has been this intentional, dishonest reframing and gaslighting, trying to make this an issue over gender rather than anything else. Like, people actually have a problem with female protagonists in video games. No, this is a matter of taste. This is a matter of expectations. It's a matter of people feeling like they're being pushed out. So today I want to talk about that. I want to talk about all the drama that's been going on with God of War Law-Fae, people's reaction to it as well as mine. I want to talk about a game that lived, died, and was buried before you even knew about it, and how so often people want you to just ignore the elephant in the room. Or they call you a misogynist. Sorry, your insults don't work here. So I sat down to watch the PlayStation State of Play, and honestly, I walked away pretty happy. I really feel like Sony is finally getting back to what their audience actually expects from them. Outside of the marathon season that they had showed off, I mean, the entire showcase was mostly just high-quality single-player games and cinematic experiences, the kind of things that actually feel like they're made for the PlayStation audience. Stuntman coming back after nearly 2 decades of being gone was a huge surprise, especially seeing that it's the Space Marine 2 devs behind it. Rayman Legends was another one. Really nice to see Ubisoft finally doing something with that.
Rayman Legends, igen, ez már hanyadjára, már vagy harmadjára van rebootolva ugyanaz a játék, mert egyébként ugye ez már az meg még Nintendo Wii-vel volt ugye reklámozva annó, vagy nem is tudom még mivel.
That IP again. Control Resonant and Onimusha both look good. I am completely stoked for the full release of No Rest for the Wicked, and Phantom Blade Zero is probably my most anticipated game of this year. Eastern developers rarely let me down. Then there was Wolverine. Now, I am not the biggest Marvel or comic book fan, but I am a huge X-Men fan. And I even like a lot of the shittier movies that most people don't like, and I also enjoy nearly every single game that has been tied to this franchise. The trailer, for me, looks sick. Apparently, it was a little bit too gory for Kotaku, but for me, it was right on the money. The combat looked good, and I am just absolutely the target audience here. Jean Grey looked a little bit off. I'm definitely going to say that, and there's really no telling which way the story is going to probably end up going. But, I mean, X-Men is my...
Meg én azt hittem, hogy Jean Grey ugye azért hívják őt Főnixnek, mert ugye ilyen piros tűz formája van ugye az erejének, mikor használja. Erre itt meg ez a tipikus magenta lila színe van, mint amit ugye a Dragon Age The Veilguardban is láttunk, meg egyéb más ugye ilyen DI játékokban, mint a Hamarosan jön ez a Hunter's Gathering. Ugye ez a magenta lila szín, ez is egyfajta ilyen trigger mostanság. Hogy amiben az benne van, az valószínűleg szarjáték lesz, ember, de ne legyen így a Wolverine-nel.
Millennial Kryptonite, I'm going to be playing this game either way. And then PlayStation revealed God of War Laufey, a spin-off title with
Itt van a God of War Laufeybe is benne van ez a lila magenta szín.
Kratos' wife Faye, set in some kind of fever dream realm for the dead gods. Visually, I think the game looks really impressive.
Meg én nem értem, mi van azzal, mi van azzal, hogy ezek a viking harcosok, vagy ezek a vikingek, ezek a Valhallába kerülnek, ha meghalnak, ha harc közben halnak meg, dicsőségben, és Helheimbe kerülnek, és ott szenvednek, ha öregségben vagy betegségben halnak meg. Azzal így mi van?
The combat is going to be a huge step up from 2018 in Ragnarok. Apparently, Kratos gave Faye all of his air combos instead of a wedding ring when they got married. But, you know, as I watched, I just felt nothing. The tone just felt so painfully millennial.
Mondom, és ez annyira Disney-s, annyira biztonsági játék. Miért van benne ez a cuki állat? Meg egy zselékocka, érted, hogy miért van benne mindig valamilyen beszélő vagy cukiság, hogy tényleg nem lehet ma már valamilyen ilyen side karakter nélkül játékot alkotni, ahol te vagy a főszereplő.
Talking cube named Frank and a sword named Rue, and there's this constant ironic dialogue and the same pink and purple aesthetic that we have seen in countless generic games over the past couple of years. And I just sat there thinking, who is this for? And with Faye as the main character, even in a spin-off, guys, I'm just going to say it. I play God of War for Kratos. I have played these games for 20 years because of the unbridled masculine energy, the visceral rage, the brutal combat, the stoicism, and then later on, the way that they handled loss, fatherhood, and grappling with your past from a male perspective. It felt like this series grew up with me. So playing a quirked up version of that same universe as Faye just doesn't really do it for me. And yes, I can see the narrative value. Faye's death in God of War 2018 left a lot of questions, but I'd always assumed that those questions, well, Kratos, he would just uncover them himself. So when I see a game like this, I have to ask, is this expanding God of War, or is it replacing it with the thing that people came for? And clearly, I'm not the only one asking that. Everybody's been talking about this, and man, has it been divisive. The trailer ended up with 340,000 likes and 179,000.
Hallod? Szóval azért, hogy arányában érted, több mint fele annyi a dislike. Egy God of War játékra. Azért az durva.
And dislikes, and some people are just really excited to learn more about Faye and her relationship with Kratos and some of the things that went left unsaid.
Esküszöm, engem rohadtul nem érdekel. Meghalt a csaj. Szóval az, hogy többet tudnánk meg a jöttünökről, érted, Jöttünheimről, vagy arról, hogy mi alapján jött, érted, a profécia, hogy Kratos megérkezik, hogy faszom tudja, érted, az érdekelne. De egy halott nőről beszélünk, nem izgat. Baromság.
They are also picking apart some of the cool references, like how Faye's vision of Kratos is helping her up in the very beginning of the game, and that lines up perfectly with the first game when he's fighting Thor. Other people were just immediately put off by the dialogue, the talking cube and the sword, and putting a woman in the center of a 20-year-old franchise that's been built around Kratos. Some people memed on that contradiction, putting Faye in the kitchen. Other people were just simply feeling like their expectations had been betrayed. Spinoff or not, they come to God of War expecting Kratos, and that's not what they got, not even close. I mean, even David Jaffe, the creator of God of War, came out and said that it just didn't make any sense to him. he went out of his way to make sure that he has no issue with a female lead. That's not what he's trying to say, but he argued that this is just not what people come to God of War for, especially with the game's overall tone, saying that without the name or the connection to the universe, he believes that this game would have been forgotten the minute it was talked about. There's been a lot of back and forth as to why people have been reacting so strongly. Some people seem genuinely confused, but I think a lot of people are just acting. Instead of engaging with what players are actually saying, you're seeing people attack their masculinity, accuse them of being afraid to play as a woman, or they're just calling them a misogynist and moving on. I wasn't even going to make a video about this until I had seen just how often people were dishonestly reframing and reducing criticism, acting like players just have no reason whatsoever to be upset when we have watched some version of this happen across nearly every fucking major franchise. People are attached to Kratos. He has been the face of this series for 20 years. And who are we kidding here? God of War has always been a game that's been primarily made for dudes, from banging chicks for red orbs to slaughtering the Greek pantheon to raising your son by your...
Konkrétan érted, ja, ott is úgy megdöngetjük Afroditét, érted, a harmadik részbe, hogy bazd meg a csajok azok maguk alá húgyoznak. Ott vannak a szolgálók, érted, néznek minket, ahogy megdöngetjük Afroditét, és azok meg így, úristen, és elolvadnak, bazd meg. Nem erről szól a God of War, érted? Meg érted, itt is, bazd meg, Hades ellen küzdünk, meg ilyenek. Egyszerűen csak
self and grappling with your past, this series has built its identity around Kratos and a distinctive male perspective. That is what people expect when they see God of War. So spin-off or not, you hand that series, you hand that role over to his wife, you are going to upset one part of that audience, which is probably in this case most of that audience. It looks like the franchise is moving away.
Ha az volt a tervük, hogy kibővítsék az univerzumot, a God of War univerzumot, vagy a viking mitológiát, meg egyéb dolgokat, semmi baj. De akkor csináltak volna neki egy teljesen új franchise-t. Csináltak volna neki egy teljesen új nevet. Ennyi. Ennyi a probléma, bazd meg.
To somebody else, and that's so obvious that even Domino's is out here calling it out. And look, man, I totally understand the argument that this is just a spin-off and that Kratos is confirmed to be coming back, and normally I would just shrug this off and move on, but the problem is that the players do not feel like the main thing is secure anymore. All likely due to some PTSD that's been brought on by pattern recognition. Across all of entertainment, we've been watching as male leads have been sidelined, aged out, humiliated, killed off, or replaced. So even when it's just one specific game that might feel harmless, it's landing inside of a much larger pattern. One that people have been pointing out for years, only to be told that they're just imagining what's happening right in front of them. Nobody would care if this was isolated, but we've been watching as Ciri's taking over for Geralt in The Witcher 4. Kate replaced Marcus in Gears. It happened with Uncharted. Melina Way with Hades 2. Atsu replacing Jin in Ghost of Yotai. We regularly see male-led games move towards female protagonists, but we never see that door swing in the opposite direction. And I am saying this as somebody that likes most of these
characters. Ezt mondom én is, hogy mindig csak egyfelé nyílik ez az ajtó. És férfiak által felfuttatott franchise-okra építik rá ezeket a női szerepeket. Ahelyett, hogy inkább csinálnának nekik saját franchise-t, saját univerzumot. Egyszerűen szánalmas. Mondom, ez ilyen tipikus, gyáva, Disney-féle biztonsági játék. Egyszerűen szar.
And yes, some of the changes that we see absolutely make complete narrative sense. I defended The Witcher 4, and I went out of my way to even defend Ghost of Yotai because Jin's story was finished. This is not me saying that every single franchise must be led by the same man forever, or even only by men in some cases. But when you're seeing the same shift happen again and again, it becomes difficult not to notice. More of the gaming space is becoming feminine coded, and the audience that has historically supported these franchises is now being told that noticing that is just them being insecure or hateful. And that's where the backlash is coming from. You know, people really love to throw around some broad numbers claiming that women make up nearly half of gamers today, but those numbers almost always include every single platform.
Kit érdekel? Szóval ha nőknek nem tetszene, érted, nem tetszenének a mai játékok, akkor nem produkálnának ilyen számokat, érted, a kapkomos játékok, akkor nem döntenének rekordot, érted, nem döntött volna rekordot a Pragmata, nem döntött volna rekordot a Crimson Desert, érted? Az, hogy hány százaléka a playereknek nő vagy férfi, hogy milyen genderrel vagy résszel rendelkezik, teljesen kurvára mindegy. Mert ha egy játék jó, tök mindegy, hogy milyen karakterről beszélünk, érted? Ha a játék jó, megveszik az emberek és játszanak vele. Ezzel dobálózni, hogy bizonyos dolgokat azért kell megváltoztatni, és bizonyos karaktereket azért kell átírni, mert hogy a nőknek a 48%-a, érted, a játékosoknak nő. Na, ez az, ami tönkreteszi az egész industryt. Mert azt gondolják az emberek, hogy ez az, amire szükségük van a nőknek. Itt nem nőkről vagy férfiakról beszélünk, hanem gamerekről. Tök mindegy, hogy milyen gender. És ha te ezzel foglalkozol, hogy hány százaléka a játékosoknak nő vagy férfi, akkor a probléma itt te vagy.
Every single mobile game, every single genre, and it's all under one massive umbrella. The minute that you start breaking that audience down by publisher, genre, and individual franchise, that picture is going to change immediately. Capcom has reported that their audience is overwhelmingly male, and more relevant here, a Nexus Mod survey from 2015 of around 25,000 respondents found that men made up 88% of the audience for God of War Ragnarok. Gaming as a whole might have a broad audience.
De ez nem azt jelenti, érted, most az, hogy 88%, ez nem azt jelenti, bazd meg, hogy csak és kizárólag csöcsöket, meg segeket kell látni. Szimplán csak csinálni kell egy normális játékot, amit az emberek hajlandóak megvenni. Pont. Ez ennyi.
But God of War does not have a broad, evenly divided audience. It has a very specific one. And when you see people that are saying that a game like this feels like it's being aimed at somebody else, they are not just basing that off of Faye being the protagonist. They're talking about everything else that's surrounding her. I think that a lot of people like to conveniently ignore how significantly changing a lead in a game affects the broader tone, narrative, dialogue, and these games are just not going to be the same. They're entirely different. And maybe that's where a lot of this frustration is actually coming from. It's not as simple as God of War with a female lead. It's the second that these studios make a change, everything else seems to change with it. That doesn't happen because a woman can't lead in a brutal or serious game or that they can't be aimed at male audiences. We already know that they can't.
Ja, persze. Hát ezért létezik, ezért van Bayonetta. Érted? Meg ezért van Stellar Blade, meg Nier Automata. Érted? Teljesen mindegy, hogy milyen leadje van egy játéknak, hogy milyen genderrel rendelkezik az a karakter. Ha jó a játék. Még mindig csak erről beszélünk.
Lara Croft, Bayonetta, Nier Automata, Stellar Blade, plenty of Final Fantasy games have made it work, and a lot of people are really looking forward to Tides of Annihilation. The difference is that those characters were written to belong as the lead in their worlds. The entire identity of the game doesn't need to bend around another character taking over. But when these modern studios inherit these male-led franchises, they seem completely incapable of doing that. Instead of placing a woman into a natural role, naturally existing there, they have to rebuild the tone around them in the safest, most corporate version of a female protagonist that they can possibly imagine. And I think that's what people see when they immediately look at Law Faye. They're not just reacting to Faye as a character or Faye replacing Kratos. They are reacting to everything that comes with her. The quips, the talking cube, the talking sword, and the version of God of War that suddenly sounds and looks like a dozen other games that everybody has already ignored.
Így van, szóval, hogy akkor ez az, amire a nők számítanak, ez az, ami olyan játékot teremt, ez teszi a játékot olyanná, amit a nők megvesznek, hogy beszél a kard, meg beszél a zselékocka, hogy akkor most már meg cuki, van benne, ilyen állatocska ott a legelejéről demónak, meg virágok ellen harcolunk, meg a lila szín. Ez az szerintük, amire szükségük van a gamer lányoknak. Értem.
Nobody is saying that women can't lead in games. In fact, I'm saying the opposite. I think that they should have their own games. It's probably not coming off the way that it probably should. If these publishers and studios are so confident in what they're doing and the changes that they're making and the characters that they're putting in, my question is, why is it so often that these characters have to inherit the names, the audiences, and the cultural weight of games that were built around men? Why don't we instead call out the blatant misogyny of the games industry and of creative industries as a whole, that they believe that women can't stand on their own, and the only way that they can is if they stand on the shoulders of men to find success? Call me.
Ugye? Minden egyes erős nő mögött a játékokba ott van egy franchise, amit már egy férfi felépített. Wow! Ez valóban reprezentálja a nőket. Lényegében maguk a játékfejlesztő cégek mondják azt, hogy a nők nem érnek semmit megfelelő férfi reprezentáció nélkül. Megfelelő franchise nélkül, amit egy férfi már felépített előttük. Konkrétan ezt mondják nekünk most ezek a cégek.
Me a misogynist? Try looking in the mirror. Now, I want to be painfully clear. I don't have any problem at all with Faye being a protagonist in God of War or in a spin-off or hell, even in a mainline series. I might even like it. I have no idea. I just know that immediately looking at it, it didn't initially look for me. The thing that I take a issue with is the broader trend of this industry taking existing games, repurposing them, and chasing different audiences, abandoning the original ones. And that's exactly what they're doing. If you're blind to that, I don't know what to tell you. These guys are so very obviously targeting women with this game. I mean, you can see it immediately in just the broader tones at the very beginning. It's the changes in color, it's the cutesy animals, it's the quippy dialogue, it's the humor, it's the fairy tale-like companions that are accompanying her. Like, these guys are very obviously targeting women. They do want to change the audience, and they're going in a different direction. Whether or not that bleeds over to the greater franchise, and this is just a gamble, we'll wait to find out. But keep in mind, one of the things this is what's bothering people. That's where the divide is coming from. Men and women fundamentally just have different interests. And while those interests sometimes may intersect, in most cases, that's coincidentally. So you're seeing a lot of people that are getting upset because they're looking at something that was historically for them and now it's not anymore. So what are they supposed to do? Especially when it takes so long for these games to come out. When they come out, oh yeah, well, God of War, don't worry, there's going to be another one with Kratos. Okay, well, it's taking you guys, I think it's like 7 years at this point that these guys have been working on this one. Oh, just wait another 7 years for the next one. That's a whole other problem, the games industry on its own. But this brings us to a crossroads. Been listening to Bone Thugs lately. Audience expansion at all costs. Ignoring any and all risks in some cases. A lot of games that are just completely terrified of having a target audience. And they're also leaving a lot of their audiences behind by doing this. Every single year, we watch as more and more games come out and they just fail. They fall flat on their face.
Yeah.
And a lot of this is just the result of these guys chasing a larger audience. They have gotten greedy. They want more people. And the more that they do it, the more people they leave behind. And eventually, the less people that are going to show up at all. Something that I think probably gets lost in all the noise of the videos that I make throughout the year is that I love games. Like, I really love games, but I also love business, sales, and marketing, and I just can't get this stuff out of my head, and I just cannot stand to watch people fail because of very obvious mistakes. That is why I talk about these topics as bluntly as I do. It's why I want games to be successful, that does not necessarily mean that I think that everything I say is right or that every prediction I'm going to make is going to come true. But one thing I don't think anybody can afford to ignore anymore is how many of these games are failing year after year because they are being made for an audience that is so broad, so diverse, and so poorly defined that they're never actually going to find one. Now, I would love...
Csinálok egy God of War játékot, ami mindenkit megcéloz, és senkinek nem kell. Majd mondjuk meglátjuk az eladásokon, de ugye a Sony-nak a sztokja az már mutatkozik. A Sony-nak a sztokján már mutatkozik, hogy érted? A zuhanás az már megkezdődött itt.
To be proven wrong, but while God of War Lawfare probably won't fail, it will undeniably sell fewer copies than God of War Ragnarok because the target audience has changed. Now, the audience is people who already played God of War, plus women tagged onto the side, plus some vague modern audience that nobody can clearly define. And while I have seen plenty of people try to argue the moral good of this because it's making the franchise more inclusive, I do not care to argue the morality of it. I am only interested in the business decision, and I am only aware of it because I was the target audience. The moment that you try to bolt on a secondary audience onto a product or unnaturally try to broaden its appeal, the entire thing is just going to get thrown into chaos. The tone changes, the marketing changes, the writing changes, the original audience becomes a lot less certain that that game is still for them, like I am with Lawfare, while the new audience that these guys are chasing might not even care what these guys are doing. We have watched these kind of shifts damage franchises and collapse studios across the entire industry. We may never see another Dragon Age after Veilguard. Saints Row went from...
Ennyi bazd meg. Ja, már annyi franchise-t láttunk, ahol 180 fokos fordulatot vettek a srácok, megpróbáltak megcélozni mindenkit, aztán a végén bezárták a céget. Yeah.
Gangsters to quirky nerds and may never return. And I am fully convinced that Fable is going to suffer the exact same fate. These are games that started with defined audiences, which then defined their writing, mechanics, and gameplay. Then somebody came in and decided that that definition was a limitation. So then they changed the tone, they widened their pitch, they contorted these games into something that alienated the people that were already invested without giving anybody else a strong reason to show up. They didn't make a larger audience, they just removed the reason for the audience to exist. All of this is being driven by profitability, or rather profitability conveniently converging with self-destructive empathy. I think a lot of people...
De igen, ez se igaz egyébként. Ez nem teljesen igaz, hogy profitorientáltak. Mert hogyha profitorientáltak lennének, akkor nem lennének 3 milliárdos mínuszba. Szóval itt már 3 milliárd dollár mínuszról beszélünk. Ez nem azt mutatja, hogy profitorientáltak lennének.
People have kind of concluded that these games basically all across the entire industry are being driven by personal politics or some kind of coordinated social agenda. And while I think that that can be true at times, I don't think it's as nearly as organized or intentional as people make it out to be. Guys, I think the vast majority of game developers are just these creative, beautiful souls who genuinely want nothing more than for everybody to feel welcome playing their games. And they just want their work to reach as many people as possible. And that just so happens to perfectly align with what executives want, just in the wrong way. Because these executives do want these games to appeal to everybody, but for a much simpler reason. They want this audience to keep growing. But I think what we're looking at is the symptom of a maturing market. I think that the games industry is largely done growing, or at the very least, that growth is going to slow dramatically. There are just only so many people in the world, only so much free time, only so much disposable income, and you're only going to be able to make this hobby accessible. So
ez is igaz egyébként, hogy ezek a AAA-s Sony cégek, mint a Santa Monica, mint a Naughty Dog, mint az Insomniac, ilyen 300, 500, 600 millió dolláros játékokat csinálnak, ilyen 5-6-7 év alatt, amiket aztán megpróbálnak eladni ilyen 70-80 dolláros áron, amik ugye egyre vókabbak, egyre jobban ugye próbálnak lefedni egy egyre nagyobb közönséget, ami végül nem kell senkinek, ráadásul egy olyan platformon, ami egyébként egyre kisebb. Szóval ugye azt nem árt tudni, hogy a PlayStation egyébként ugye egyre rosszabb konzoleladásokkal rendelkezik. Egy olyan piacon, ahol egyébként most már egyre drágább a konzol, mert most már $900 kérnek el érte. Ráadásul főleg mostanában ugye az inflációnak köszönhetően egyre kevesebbet ér a pénzed, míg egyre drágábbak a dolgok. És ez az, ami miatt is szépen lassan tényleg összeomlik az egész gaming industry, hiszen hogyan van neked pénzed arra, ha egyre kevesebbet ér a pénzed, hogyan van neked pénzed arra, hogy vegyél ilyen dolgokat, amik egyre drágábbak, és egyre kevesebbet ér a pénzed. Szóval tényleg durva dolgok történnek még itt a jövőbe. Ez egyre jobban hanyatlik, és egyre veszélyesebb.
Much before you're going to reach a point of saturation. And I think that gaming is pretty damn saturated.
Ja.
Now, at the same time, we have games that are taking longer to make, costing more to produce, and the hobby itself becoming more expensive to enter. Things that really should not be happening at the exact same time. More people are being forced out of the hobby financially, while these companies are also expecting to still grow year after year. So now we have these executives that are just scrambling, trying to deny the reality that's right in front of them. They don't want to shrink their companies. They don't want to lower their projections. They don't want to tell their shareholders that the market has finally reached its limit. So instead, these guys are trying to broaden their audience. They're trying to reshape existing franchises and existing studios to fit more people, assuming that the original audience is still going to remain loyal no matter what these guys do. And then they go and they chase this audience that may never actually be interested in their games at all. The place we've seen this happen the most clearly has been with live service games, To Kill the Justice League, Concord, High Guard, Marathon, and probably a dozen other games that nobody has even heard of. And I know that some people are going to say, wait, well, some of those games are completely new. They didn't change their audience within an existing franchise. Well, sometimes that shift is not happening inside of a game. It's actually happening at a studio level. After just 3 months, the live service MOBA Spellcaster Chronicles is already shutting down. And I don't think most people even...
Erről nem is hallottam. A Quantic Dreams, ami csinálta a Detroit Become Human-t, csinált egy live service MOBA játékot. Soha nem hallottam róla.
Even knew this game existed. Actually, I'm positive they didn't because, well, games journalists didn't even review it, and the game only peaked at around 888 players before it just was canceled immediately. This game was made by Quantic Dream, the same studio that did Heavy Rain and Detroit Become Human, two of the most popular and recognizable choice-driven narrative RPGs or narrative games that have ever been made. Heavy Rain was a massive commercial success on PlayStation 3. Detroit Become Human is still selling today. It just recently passed 15 million copies. This studio doesn't make MOBAs. They don't make multiplayer games. Quantic Dream built their entire reputation around cinematic, narrative-driven experiences. Then it pivoted into basically the exact opposite direction of the audience that these guys already have, and that audience did not follow them. Quantic Dream is obviously known. They already had millions of players that cared about their work, but none of that matters when you go and you make something that those people never asked for in a market that nobody is waiting for you. That's exactly what happened there. But I think the best example of all this, or probably the worst example in this case, is Sony. Sony is probably the one publisher that has been the most heavily invested in the live service push. At one point, these guys had 12 live service games that were planned, and while we have no idea what that list looks like now, we do know what...
5 éve. 6 éve, 2020-ban ugye bejelentette a Sony, hogy a single player játékoknak nincsen jövője, úgyhogy 12 darab live service játékot tervez kiadni 5 éven belül. Na most 2025-re 8 be lett zárva ebből. Szóval beleinvestelt egy csomó pénzt, aztán bezárta őket. És még mindig jönnek olyan játékok, mint a Fair Games, meg mint a Hunter's Gathering. komolyan, bazd meg, mi a tököm történik a PlayStation-nel, bazd meg? Mi történik itt, ember?
Followed failure after failure. Sony never even finding a single major hit with all that they were chasing. And the entire time that these guys were doing this, they neglected the audience that built PlayStation. Sony became so obsessed with reaching new players and chasing whatever part of the market that they thought looked the most profitable that they lost sight of why people bought their consoles at all. And that thinking didn't stop at a business level. It spread to the studios themselves until these companies seemingly could not recognize the audiences that were sitting directly in front of them. That is exactly how you see a company that...
Nem hiába szakította meg, érted, a szerződését a Shift Up stúdió is a Sony-val. Érted? Mert egyszerűen a PlayStation alatt jelenleg ezek a stúdiók szépen lassan összeomlanak. Mert olyan dolgokat csinálnak, ami nem kell senkinek. Ki kérte ezt? Komolyan.
That is abandoning the Destiny brand to go all in on Marathon, a game that just went free for this last weekend and was only able to peak at around 40,000 players. Sony spent years denying the reality of their own audience, and the results ended up showing up in their own sales numbers. In 2019, they had reached their peak of 58 million units sold. By 2024, that number had fallen to...
Itt van, erről beszéltem. Egyre kevesebb a PlayStation konzol, ami egyre kevesebb eladást hoz magával. Egyre kevesebb embert érdekel az, hogy vegyenek PlayStation-t. Arról nem is beszélve, hogy nincsenek eleve PlayStation címek, szóval eddig az emberek azért vettek PlayStation-t, mert mindig voltak ugye PlayStation címek. Most meg ugye nincsenek. Saját magát fullasztja a Sony. Ilyen hülyeségekkel, mint a Marathon, meg mint ez a God of War Laufey.
More than half, 28 million, before recovering slightly to 32 million in 2025. And what changed? Sony started giving their audience what they actually expected from PlayStation again. Astrobot, Ghost of Yotai, Death Stranding 2, high-quality single-player games with clear identities and an obvious audience. It was only when Sony finally returned back to the players that it had spent years overlooking that their numbers finally started moving back in the right direction. And I think that says everything. Sony did not need to discover some new massive audience hidden somewhere beyond the edge of the market. It already had one. They already had their own. The problem was that it became so consumed with finding the next audience that they stopped serving the people who were already there. These guys are so absolutely terrified of just admitting that while the games industry is bigger than it's ever been before, it's likely not going to get much bigger than what it already is, because it is massive. And instead of trying to squeeze water from a stone, these guys need to instead just draw water from the well that they already built. I mean, this is probably the most important part, but serving the audiences that you already have, consistently serving the audiences that you already have, is how you reach secondary audiences. No matter what, just because it's just the way that markets work, secondary audiences are always going to find your products. But in most cases, they find your products through the audience that's already there. So if those guys are happy, they're likely to hear about it more often, and they're also they're also more likely to hear about it positively rather than negatively. Too many of these companies...
Én is, érted, nem hiába beszélek manapság konkrétan csak és kizárólag negatívan a PlayStation-ről. Nem hiába adtam el 2 éve a PlayStation-ömet úgy, hogy én már ugye a PlayStation 1 óta PlayStation-ös vagyok, szóval én ugye már azért több mint 25 éve ugye PlayStation-ös vagyok. De hát ugye az, amit jelenleg képvisel a PlayStation, a képvisel a Sony, ezt már nem vagyok hajlandó támogatni. És milyen jó, hogy megtettem. Mert egyre rosszabb. Szóval két évvel ezelőtt én nem gondoltam volna, hogy ennyire rossz lesz. Most meg már... Ja.
Companies have become so self-obsessed over the idea of radically changing their entire franchises to be able to reach wider audiences, to reach more people. And the thing is that doing the best you possibly can for the audience that you already have is how every single company has reached its peak. Every single time. But it only ever becomes their peak because they abandon that audience once they reach that level. It's this never-ending cycle where these guys just get way too greedy once they're up at the top, and they enjoy so much success that the only path that they can see forward is with a new audience.
Ja. Ez a PlayStation-re kifejezetten igaz. Ha már egyszer a csúcson voltál, onnan már csak lefelé van az út, öreg. Márpedig... Ja. 2021. Hát szomorú. Most meg aztán érted, megy lefele, mint a kurva élet.
Not the one that they already have. And it destroys these guys. So what they end up doing is they just basically come up with the idea of just fundamentally changing these games, and it just doesn't work with the audience. I mean, try to keep in mind that the target demographic, or maybe a better way for me to be able to say this is the most profitable demographic inside of the games industry historically has always been men from ages 18 to 34.
Így van.
It's always been that way.
Ez csak szimplán, ez is gondolom valami evolúciós dolog, vagy valami biológia, érted, vagy tesztoszteron, vagy én nem tudom, de a férfiak mindig is érdekeltebbek voltak abba, hogy valamilyen úton, módon, ugye, érted, hogy más csináljunk. Ezekbe a technológiai dolgokba mindig is a férfiak voltak érdekeltebbek, mint a nők. Ez valószínűleg valamilyen evolúció. És érted, most is akárhogy is próbálják tagadni ezek az emberek, a férfiak voltak azok, akik az egész gaming industry-t felépítették. Mert mindig is a férfiak voltak azok, akik a legtöbb pénzt beleölték ezekbe a dolgokba. A vásárlók, ugye? Ez ilyen egyszerű.
The people that are spending the most money on video games, at least on like the broader trend of genres and everything like that.
Yeah.
And there are certain themes and fantasies that always speak to that demographic. It's guns and cars and powers and swords and monsters and attractive women and competition and
amíg a férfiak ugye ilyen dolgokra költöttek, addig a nők meg könyveket olvastak arról, hogy milyen a szex gyík emberekkel, meg kentaurokkal, meg ilyenekkel. De érted, ez csak szimplán igaz. Ez így működik. Fasz tudja, hogy miért. Valami evolúció, gondolom. De érted, ez a rendje, ez a világ rendje.
Attractive women, and because we know what those games look like, because we know what those tastes are, because it's so predefined and it's so reliable, really what it is, it's so reliable. Anytime something changes in that, it is so noticeable. That audience can see it immediately. Other audiences can see it immediately. It stands out immediately.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't feel like it belongs. That doesn't mean that's the only audience that you have to make things for. You can make things for other audiences, but if you're going to change things within that core demographic, that's where you're going to find a lot of heat. That's where you're going to find a lot of these problems. That's where you're going to find a lot of these people that are getting upset. And it's why people are getting upset. Just something to keep in mind. Anyway,
Ja, mondom. Szimplán, mondom, ez valószínűleg valamilyen evolúciós dolog, hogyha van egy olyan dolog, ami nem illik bele a képbe, azt észreveszed. És ez egyik ilyen dolog az, hogy egy olyan világba, amit férfiak építettek fel férfiaknak, bizonyos dolgok nőkkel kapcsolatban nem illenek bele. Akármilyen gusztustalan is ezt kimondani. De ez így van.